for making it to the national finals. I'm Diana Owen. I'm a professor of political science at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and actually a proud graduate of the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Congratulations and welcome. My name is Tom Tinder, and I'm an attorney from Charleston, West Virginia.
Good afternoon. I'm Steve Franczyk. I'm a retired professor of political science from the U.S. Naval Academy.
And if you could now introduce yourselves and your teacher.
Good afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. We are juniors from Unit 6, representing Wauwatosa West as the Wisconsin State Champions. My name is Jude Whale.
I'm Zoe Del Vecchio.
I'm Donovan McGann.
I'm Emily Lenahan.
And I'm Ella Archambault.
We're here on behalf of our mentors, teaching assistants, and teacher, Mr. Chadmatuski.
Great. So the question that we have for you today is question 2. President Dwight D. Eisenhower said, "We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. Do you agree or disagree? Why? What disagreements did the founders have about a standing army, and are they relevant today? To what extent should there be an international U.S. military presence?" Please begin.
What, sir, is the use of a militia? It is to prevent the establishment of a standing army, the bane of liberty. This statement from founding father Eldridge Gary encompasses a theme among the founders, a fear that, if instituted, standing armies would be used to revoke the liberty of citizens.
In 49 BC, Caesar led his army across the Rubicon to conquer the very empire they had been defending. In 1765, the British Parliament instituted the Quartering Act, which specified the housing locations and conditions of the British Standing Army. A month later, the army was turned against the colonists. Both examples proved to the founders that standing armies had great potential to infringe upon citizens' liberties.
That is why under Article 2 of the Articles of Confederation, there is no means to grant the national government to raise an army. Instead, they were left to rely on states to raise their militia when needed, following Montesquieu's view in his speech, The Spirit of Law, that republics best exist in small homogeneous nations to ensure security against abuse of power.
In 1787, the inability of the national government to suppress Shays' rebellion underscored their lack of means to raise a federal army. The founders were left in disagreement. They recognized the need for protection against forces both domestic and foreign that threatened citizens' safety and freedom, but conversely, they still feared a standing army would result in damage.
Today, threats to liberty and security come in different forms. The increased influence corporations have over the military. This is a misplacement of power, seeing as these institutions are not invested in the citizens' liberty or security.
The military-industrial complex was strengthened during the Vietnam War when the government turned largely to private contractors, many of which were tied to politicians. This misplacement of power has continued through the rapid rise of government spending on military contracts. According to the Project on Government Oversight, in 2019, the Pentagon spent $370 billion on contracting, more than half the total defense budget and 164% higher than its spending in 2001.
Much like in the founding era, national protection is crucial, but the United States has become unreasonable with expanding the military-industrial system, that it is now detrimental to the liberty of the people. Funds can be better allocated to domestic programs that focus on other metrics than global military presence. According to former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, the current U.S. battle fleet is larger than the next 13 navies combined, 11 of which are our partners and allies. This massive disparity disregards the nation's power through economic prosperity, while providing little benefit in this degree of excess.
Overall, there are many methods to maintain security while reducing costs and saving lives. Currently, America's relocation of troops to Guam is beneficial, but there should also be a reduction of troops in Japan and Guam by half. The reduction and relocation will fulfill the same objective while reducing costs and decreasing political tensions. Looking at South Korea, America has 23,475 troops stationed mainly to deter potential attacks from North Korea. This is unnecessary in this location and only elevates the likelihood of conflict.
Troops in Saudi Arabia should be removed because of Saudi influence in Yemen and the Iranian anti-American sentiment created by our presence. Additionally, both countries are more stable now than in the past, and removal would save $87 billion annually.
Funding is essential to social programs domestically that in turn increase liberty and security. To assess international military presence going forward, the creation of a congressional committee to weigh defense spending with social programs would be invaluable.
Dr. Martin Luther King stated in his speech Beyond Vietnam that a nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. Let us heed his advice to avoid such a fate. Thank you. This concludes our statement. We are now ready for follow-up.
Thank you. I'd like to ask you a question about the humanitarian role of the military. What do you think that role should be? And should it be maintained at current levels, expanded, or reduced?
I believe it should be expanded. We can see with the military going in to help after the hurricane in Haiti, but also that American military troops, specifically the Navy SEALs, went in to help rebuild schools in Afghanistan after they were destroyed by the Taliban. This needs to be expanded because it promotes a good nature of the American Army. And we can see that with Hong Kong protesters waving American flags, it promotes American idealism throughout the world.
I agree. I think this expansion of humanitarian efforts should occur specifically in our Israel and Palestine conflict that is escalating recently.
We should also use it to aid other countries that are struggling in humanitarian crisis due to US action. Our arms sold to the Saudi Arabian government were then turned against the Yemen citizens in bombings that led to a massive rise in poverty that has never been seen before. So using troops in Yemen to rebuild the infrastructure would be greatly beneficial both to our image and also to the Yemen citizens that were put in a terrible position because of us.
Again, 9/11 terrorist attacks, we've seen multiple groups of army and military come help citizens in humanitarian aid, as well as firefighters and police department, as well as we sent troops over into the Middle East in order to calm down conflicts, as well as potential terrorist attacks coming over to America.
We have become immensely entangled in the conflict in Israel, between Israel and Palestine, with our alliance with Israel and also our aid to Palestine. And I think we could withhold the aid from Palestine until they reduce some violence within that conflict.
Let me ask a question in the broader context of Unit 6, and that is that in many states today, there has been legislation to make voting rules stricter. Do you think it's a good idea? And why do you think it's being discussed at this point in time?
We've seen that African Americans already struggle, especially in cities, to make it out to polling locations. We've seen, especially in Georgia, certain citizens had to wait 8 hours in line in order to vote. And making it harder to vote, well argued that it will prevent fraud, is also just infringing upon the core principles that we hold in a democratic government.
According to a professor at Georgetown University, Diane Owens, there was a study that We the People alumni are much more likely to vote at a higher rate. And we can see that people who do not take social programs in high school, such as We the People, are less likely to get out and vote. And we never want to discriminate against people abusing their social contract and their right to vote. So we must instead make voting easier than harder. And then we can do this by eliminating wait times and getting the youth more involved at working at polling stations like I did this summer.
You could also make voting easier through a national holiday, such as Australia has, and making voting compulsory. But this could be seen as compelled speech, as the First Amendment right to free speech could also be interpreted as the right to not speak.
I agree with my panel members that we should make the voting process easier, especially when it discriminately can affect our Black and Brown communities. Additionally, democracy relies on civic virtue. Benjamin Franklin said, "A republic if you can keep it," and we rely on voting to pursue this civic virtue.
I essentially disagree with my panel members. I believe that we should make voting rights harder, essentially, seeing with the immigrants coming into America, specifically looking at the Mexican border. We see that adults are throwing their children over the border. And while they grow up, they might not have specific education as we have. So using that education for voting rights may make it seem impossible.
$370 billion is being spent on private contractors, is what you said. What can we do, not theoretically, but what can we do practically to rein that in?
More transparency when it comes to who's funding the elections and who's funding their runs for office. A study by Project for Government Oversight found that nearly $237 million on average, $1,000 on average is spent to members of committees that work to allocate funds to these corporations. And if people know exactly who's funding these committees, they can better enforce what they believe and put control into the citizens' hands.
Nothing can be done, as shown by a study by the Harvard University. The top 10 think tanks in Washington, D.C. that help decide over congressional bills are funded mostly by military contractors. And although this is unfair, you have to take it into account, if not them, who? If not them providing the funding, who will be the ones to provide the funding? And it's essential that we keep these think tanks operating.
The transparency that my colleague has outlined could be seen as problematic, as in foreign policy and military operations, there is sometimes a need for national security and for secrecy in certain matters.
As we see, $370 billion of military spending is used on those contractors. We are essentially ranked number 1 in military spending and 27 in education, as we can move some of that military spending in contractors over to education to boost up our education, as we are ranked low in the world.
Thank you.
Because as Martin Luther King said, education is our strongest weapon.
Thank you.
Thanks. Under what circumstances, was it not my turn?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Oh, Steve, I'm sorry. Please go.
That's all right. Your generation has less participation than other generations. What can or should we be doing about that?
Alexis de Tocqueville observed in early colonial America that small groups that were very virtuous were leading to the well and high functioning American government that we saw back then. So shifting towards using these social media platforms in order to engage these youth more, and in a way come back to the founding principles that made America so successful early on.
I would argue that our generation is more participatory, as being a woman in the early founding era, I would not be allowed to be involved in a lot of progressive factions in my community. However, today I co-founded a feminist student union, which would be impossible back then.
I refute your claim. I also disagree with the concept of bowling alone. I think that our generation is now more connected than ever before. Older generations like to criticize our generation for constantly being on their phone, but I think it's because we're more connected than we ever had before. And we can see this through this summer. Personally, in my town of Wauwatosa, BLM riots were mostly funded by the teenage generation who went out and advocated for things that they believed in, now more than ever.
I essentially disagree with my panel member, Emily. I believe that bowling alone theory doesn't make sense in this scenario. In our city of Wauwatosa, we've seen Black Lives Matter protests gone violent in a way and have ruined local businesses that just hurt them. So our community came together and cleaned up the mess that these protests left. Therefore, the bowling alone theory does not exist in that state of nature.
Under what circumstances, if any, should the National Guard be deployed domestically?
Little Rock 9 is my favorite example, is when the National Guard was used appropriately. And we can see that the National Guard helped protect an amendment and carry out something that needed to be protected. But an example from the past in which it should have been used were the doctor riots of 1888 or 1788. And we can see that the National Guard was not put into place when they should have been to protect the people of Columbia University, including Hamilton himself and John Jay.
Some people believe that the presence of the National Guard in DC is a form of a standing army today, but I disagree with this because the founders could have never foreseen the extent to which The Second Amendment has allowed for citizens to be armed with semi-automatic rifles, and we need the Guard to protect our Capitol Police officers, as one was ran over with a car and killed just the other week.
The use of the National Guard after natural disasters is useful. We saw this especially in Louisiana and New York, when cleanup could not just be done by citizens, but it required that an outside force such as the National Guard be used.
Let me ask this this question. You
And we were ready
and
for
that-
you.
Yeah, but it was the best question. I don't think you've been able to answer it.
Well,
I
then,
want to hear it.
oh yeah, now I want to know.
I'm not telling.
So great job, everyone. Now we're going to give you some feedback on your presentation. I thought that your prepared remarks were really well done. I thought you did a nice job with the Jerry quote to set up where you were going with your argument. You went way back in history to kind of talk about key events that kind of pertain to the development of a standing army and the debate over that. I thought that you did a really nice job of bringing in statistical and factual information to back up the points that you were making. And one of the things that I really liked is that you would talk about a problem and then you'd bring up a solution or a series of solutions. And I thought that that was really strong kind of methods of dealing with issues. The examples that you gave kind of from, Guam, South Korea, Saudi Arabia, Israel and Palestine, Haiti, you showed a real breadth and depth of knowledge about the issue. I thought that you did a really great job of answering the questions. And I also I thought this was a very good strategy that you used the hand signals so that you were all able to kind of take your turn and answer, which I thought was really great. And I also like the fact that some of you drew on your personal experiences as working as an election observer or pollster at the polling place or starting the feminist student organization. I thought that was really good. I also really liked, and I thought it was a very impassioned answer where you brought in your hometown and the BLM protest and that you showed disagreement, but it was respectful. So I thought that was really great. And of course, you cited my studies. What can I say? But what that shows is just what we saw here today, is that students that do We the People know their stuff. So great job.
Thank you. Thank you.
I was going to question your use of Dr. Owens as a source, but I won't do that.
Yeah, she's
No,
unreliable.
I thought you did a good job also. I like the fact you gave us both sides in terms of a number of the characteristics or questions that we had. That you disagreed was a strength rather than a weakness. It would be fun to kind of get the two sides to debate a little bit longer in terms of some of these questions. They're kind of quick answers. You anticipated my second question from my first question in terms of voting, which was fine, and you covered things things well. So I thought you did an excellent job. Remember that you're in a kind of rarefied atmosphere. You are among the national champions in terms of Unit 6. That's the unit that deals with participation. And so I hope that you will take the knowledge you have acquired and use that to apply it to help solve problems, because it's always been small groups of people with knowledge that have changed our country for the better. So congratulations and go get them.
Thank you.
Any presentation that makes reference to Caesar, Shays Rebellion, Vietnam, and Little Rock 9 has got to be interesting and educational. And yours was all of that. You answered the question in your 4-minute presentation, the questions in your 4-minute presentation very well. And then you were just really superb as it related to answering our questions. By answering our questions, sometimes we'll ask a question and just some facts will be thrown out at us or some information, but you actually responded and gave your opinions and gave particular positions, and you disagreed with one another. And may I also say you respectfully disagreed with one another, which is something that we need more of in public discourse today. I wanted to also commend you, as Diane did, with having putting up fingers, because that's very helpful for us. I mean, there's 5 screens. We don't know who's, the box lights up and so forth, but it's very good to know that where to go. So thank you. That was very helpful to us. Although I must tell you, when the first person put up this, I thought it was the peace sign. I was thinking, where's that coming from? Anyway, that shows my age. I just did think that you did a very good job, but I must say, Steve and I are both going to mark you down. We have to. I mean, you mentioned and cited Diane, but didn't cite us. I mean, he's a professor and I'm a small town lawyer. Anyway, you just did a great job, and I commend you, and congratulations to you for making it to the finals. And
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
based upon your presentation and based upon your leadership talents that you've already demonstrated to us, as Diane said and Steve said, you just cannot let this We the People program be the end of the line, so to speak, and it's a class project or a semester activity and you're on to something else tomorrow. You are such good citizens and you have so much leadership and so much knowledge that you have to continue to be leaders in your community and in your state and in our nation. And if you do, then our future is in very, very good shape. Congratulations to you. Thank you and good luck to you.
Thank you so